Hello, Happy Valley. Today's video is all about working with ink wash. So we worked with the dip pen and the India ink on a previous video, and today is about working with a regular paintbrush and that same ink. So you'll also need to open up that ink container and get out a regular paintbrush. If you have picked up the art kit, those supplies are in there. You are also going to need this worksheet. So please, if you haven't done so, you need to come by the school and pick up these worksheets or the supplies. Do not try to do this stuff on regular paper. The paper can't handle this ink and it will bleed everywhere. It'll get everywhere. Just be very careful when you go to open up the ink well that I provided you in those art kits. Additional materials you might need, maybe a little cup of water and some regular paper towels. Anyway, let's get started. Before we get started with today's video, you're going to need the following items. You're going to need something that you can put paint in, or not paint in, but ink in, a little paint palette like this. I've put these in the art kits for you. They're not numbered or anything like that, but just a little kit like this. You're going to need some water. You're going to need your India ink, and you're going to need a paintbrush and some paper towels. I've also, you might want to use a test strip, so I've got a little test strip here as well. And a test strip would be beneficial, especially for this assignment today. So what we're going to do is we are first going to dilute our ink wash, or we're going to create an ink wash. So an ink wash is just working with that India ink, but adding water to it. Now you can create values by lightening them by adding more water to them. If you don't have, I didn't put these in the kits, but I have a little pipette. That's what I use to kind of suck up some of the ink, suck up some of the water. You can use your actual nib from your dip pen. You can kind of use that to add ink to it. But first you want to do is kind of add your water. My water is going to be a little bit black because of the India ink that I already have in my container. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to suck up some water with my container. So you just need to separate some water into these sections. W, what I have that for is just straight up India ink. 5 would be the next darkest, 4, all the way down to 1 being the lightest. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some water in here. And I want to try and keep about the same amount of water, or a little bit less as a little bit more, as I go. But I'm separating it in here. You could use, I don't know, just use something to get some water into these containers. Again, mine's turning black because I already had some India ink in this. You don't have to do it this way. You can straight up use it, by taking your paintbrush into the water and into the ink. That's up to you. I just feel like this is really easy to show. Okay, so I've got my water in here. Now what I want to do is add my ink. So I'm going to suck it up. But you can, here, I'll do it with my dip pen. So here is my ink, and I'm just going to use the dip pen, and I'm really going to filling it up past that reservoir. And I'm going to let the majority of it go into that number 5. I'm going to just stick my whole pen in there. I might actually hit it with a little bit more. Then my next one, I'm going to get a little bit of ink on there, not fully submerging it, just kind of hitting it with the water. Next one, a little bit less. I'm not even refilling my ink at this point. What you're doing is you're creating a value. You're lightening this ink. If you did use your dip pen, make sure that you rinse it off with the Windex or with the pen cleaner. That way it doesn't ruin that nib. Remember to always do that. Don't just let that nib sit there, because it's just going to ruin it. So make sure you thoroughly clean it. When I'm done with my nibs, I usually take them off the pen holder and I thoroughly cleanse them making sure I got everything off of there as best as I can. We want to preserve them. All right, so once you've got your ink distributed into those spaces, or you can work again straight from the ink wash. What we're going to do is, here's my little test strip. Now for my well, I'm just going to use straight up India ink. So what this does, and I'm going to show you on here, this is my India ink. And I'm barely placing my paintbrush in there. Now the paintbrushes that came in the kits, they're not the best, so you're just going to have to work with them. If you have your own paintbrush at home that you want to use, you do that. I barely made contact. I didn't even stick the head of the paintbrush very far into the India ink. It sucked it up. So this is straight up India ink, and it's going to make a pretty dark mark. The more water I add, so you could just use your water, and if I touch, it's going to start making that water darker, and it's going to make the ink that I place on my paper lighter. So you don't have to use this little palette thing that I placed in your art kits. You can just use up the ink. Again, I placed my paintbrush into the water, placed it into the water again, placed it into the water again. And slowly I'm getting lighter and lighter and lighter. It might not look like it, but if I took a paper towel and I sucked up some of this water, you'll see how much lighter those values are becoming. So I'm creating values by adding water to this. And this is the same concept that watercolor is. You can use the watercolor, the more water you add to it, the lighter the value is going to become. So now I have added in this art, and the art kits and everything was this worksheet for ink wash. And so that's what we're doing. We are going to create some values, a value scale. So again, I like working with my darkest value, and that's why on this little palette I have everything listed as W meaning well, meaning it's straight up into ink. 5 is my darkest, 4, 3, 2, 1, yada, yada, yada. So what you're just going to do is take your darkest value and you're going to create a value scale with this. Just going to fill in that space. Now you could use straight up India ink. That's going to make it really dark. So here I'm just going to use straight up India ink right here. How much darker it's become. Now, ink wash is so fun. I really enjoy ink wash. I actually like it better than working with the dip pen. I find it just a fun medium to work with. What I do like about it, and we'll learn more about that down below, is I like to work wet on wet, which means that the paper is kind of already wet, and then I add the India ink on there. It makes it a lot easier to work with. It is a very sometimes frustrating medium because it's one of these that once you place that on that paper, it's permanent. There's some things that you can do to kind of lift up ink wash, but for the most part, it's set in stone. Here's my next value. And as you can see on here, they are getting lighter and lighter as we go. Now if you find that maybe two values are the same, come in and add more water to it. Really lighten it up. And then again, use that paper towel. Come in here with a paper towel and absorb some of that stuff while it's still wet, and you'll actually lighten that value. And then our lightest value of all, So we've created a nice gradient value scale, or value scale, not gradient. Below, we're going to create a gradient scale. So what I like to do for the gradient scale is a nice smooth transition. I want to, instead of having these spaces like I do above here, I want to try to create a nice smooth transition. What I like to do is work with my lightest color. So I'm going to work with a little bit of the 1, and I'm going to work from the left this time all the way over to the right. But I'm really filling this space in with this 1. And I'm getting the paper wet. Now, I prefer this method. You don't have to do it this way. And this is really just, practice and learning about the material. So if you do something that's different than the way I'm doing it, that's fine. We're learning. That's all that matters. You don't learn by doing things right the first time. You learn by messing up. I've already kind of got a dark part right here. So I've kind of placed that 1 on there. And now I'm going to go back. This time I'm going to work with, I'm going to skip ahead and go to the 3, my third darkest value. And you can see it moving around maybe on my paper. At least I can see it. And I'm just kind of pulling it towards the lightest area. And if it starts to, stick to the paper and it's not really lightening in value, add a little bit of water to it. I'm going to move up maybe to a level 4. And again, I'm going to start working my way to the left. And then I'm going to come in with my darkest value. I'm creating a nice little value scale on here. Now, because I worked with the water already being placed on here, I have the ability to come back with a paper towel while it's still kind of wet and pick things up. So if things are not getting where I want them to be, or I want them to be a little bit lighter, I have that option. But once things dry, that's just the way it is.
Patty, please call extension 2603. Patty, please call extension 2603.
Okay. So for this bottom part of this worksheet, we have the ink on dry, the wet on wet, and a bloom. Now the bloom is so much fun. I can't wait to show you guys that one. So the ink on dry, that's just saying let's take dry paper, all right, and add ink to it. Now what you'll notice when you add ink, and I'm just going to go straight for the well. So this is the darkest ink. What you'll note is it's going to quickly be absorbed into the paper. And here's my ink. Okay, maybe I didn't want to make it this dark. I need to hurry up. I don't have much time. So if I don't want that to be dark, I need to hurry up right now. And I can come in here and try to pick stuff up, and it's not going to pick anything up. So when I say you need to hurry, I mean you need to hurry. And so if you're working, ink on dry, you better know exactly what it is that you're doing, because if you make any kind of mistake on this, the only option I think that you might have is to add a little bit of water onto it as fast as you can, really. And then maybe you can pick a little bit up No, not much is coming up at all. So ink on dry is, and you better have an idea of what you are doing, and you better know exactly what you're doing if you're going to work ink on dry. Now, ink on wet, we've been doing this, and I've been saying this for a while. So I like to put a base coat of water on down, put some water on there. It might have a little bit of ink in it. If you don't want that, you need to go get clear water, clean water. But I've got that water on here. And now if I take that 5 and I add that on here, it slows the process down. So now if I added this dark mark on here, and whoa, I think that's too dark, I can go and take my paper towel and I can absorb a lot more and pick up a lot more of it. I might be able to come back in even more and add more water to it, and I might be able to get a little bit more up. So I prefer the wet on wet method just because it makes it so much easier if you've made a mistake to try and correct it. All right, way different than the ink on dry. And then this one, the bloom, is my favorite. So get some water down, just maybe straight up water. Get a good amount of water on here. You don't have to fill this whole space, but get you some water on there. And then go and take some of that straight up ink, the India ink, and just press. And that creates a bloom. These are blooms, and they're so much fun to do. I love them. All right, and lastly we have, let's shade these forms. Same thing that we were working on before with the dip pen. I just want you to kind of add some shading, but using the ink wash. So right now I do have a dark value on my paintbrush. This is going to be my darkest area. I'm going to go in and add a little bit more water to it. Dry off my brush, add more water. So right now I'm just working with water in the ink. And I'm pushing that water into the previous ink. And I'm filling this whole space, but what I can simply do, I've left that little space right there because I want that to be my direct light source. But what I'm going to do is take my paper towel, kind of come in here and just blot and pick up some stuff, and it's really going to lighten that sphere. Now where I originally placed the ink on here, it's going to be really, really dark. But what I'm going to do is come back in with just a little bit more that darker value. Taking my brush with more water on it. More water. And just kind of working it around. And I'm building this up. Having a little bit of fun with it. All right, and then over here on the curve or the linear shape, I'm wanting this side to be my darkest, so I just went with the well. And I'm doing ink on dry because I don't really care. I want it to be the darkest area. I don't need to really edit anything or subtract anything. Then I'm going to add, I've already got that ink on my brush, so I'm just going to use the straight up water onto here. And I'm still, once I get this part done, I'm going to go and add just more water onto my brush. I'm not really adding any ink onto here because I'm wanting that value to get lighter. And what I can do while this is still kind of wet is take my paper towel at the end, come in here and just absorb a little bit. And there we go. So that is the ink wash, working with the ink wash. Play around with it, have a little fun. I personally prefer ink wash over the dip pen. Have fun.